That's okay.
I'm Scott Walter, president of the Capital Research Center.
Okay.
Washington, D.C. We're a think tank that specializes in studying the nonprofit world.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No trouble. As I said, just for the sake of argument, let's say not one vote in the whole state was fraudulent or miscounted. You would still have the problem that I'm here to describe, and it did not occur only in the past. As we speak, the very same private nonprofit is continuing to offer local Georgia election offices money. This supposedly nonpartisan nonprofit is itself funded to the tune of $350 million by one billionaire family, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's. Why should this disturb you or the citizens of Georgia? I can answer that with a simple question. Does every one of you facing your next election know that some geographic locales hold more votes for you than others? Do you know the demographic characteristics of persons most likely to vote for you? Their ages, marital status, sex, race, and the like? Of course you do. That's how you and every candidate build electoral majorities and win. Political activists in and out of the official political parties know these simple truths as well, and they use ever more sophisticated micro-targeting to turn out voters. That's fine when the activists are connected to our political parties or when they're in groups like the National Rifle Association or Planned Parenthood, whose legal status publicly acknowledges that they intend to influence public policy, register voters, and otherwise engage in political battles in ways that often benefit one political party or the other. By contrast, it's not right when in Georgia and other battleground states you have political parties and elections significantly helped by the type of nonprofit that's not supposed to get in the middle of elections, the so-called 501c3 nonprofit that's supposed to be charitable, educational, religious, and strictly nonpartisan. I don't want to see donors or C3 nonprofits anywhere along the political spectrum subtly manipulating elections through gifts to government offices. But this year in Georgia, tens of millions of dollars from that single nonprofit funded by that single billionaire family, the Zuckerbergs, first flowed into a C3 called the Center for Tech and Civic Life. And then those millions flowed into dozens of Georgia election offices. Not in all the counties, only in 44 of the state's 159 counties, according to CTCL's limited public disclosure. More than 2/3 of the counties in Georgia received nothing. That money made a dramatic difference in your election this November, and it was not a nonpartisan difference. You shouldn't be surprised the center's results were partisan, because its leaders all come from a Democratic-aligned nonprofit group called the New Organizing Institute, which was so successful boosting the Democratic Party in elections that the Washington Post gushed it was, quote, the Democratic Party's Hogwarts of digital wizardry, close quote. Online messaging and all forms of voter outreach were this group's bread and butter. These wizards know how to turn the right people into registered voters and get them to the polls for their favored candidates. The Capital Research Center, where I work, has not been able to verify all the funding the Center for Tech and Civic Life gave Georgia counties because the center isn't disclosing its grants to us or the Associated Press or other inquirers, even though it will have to disclose those grants in its next IRS filing a year from now. But using local government records and news accounts, we've captured many of the grant amounts, including what were likely the largest ones given to the largest urban areas. I'll read you just a few of our findings. While I do, ask yourself, do these numbers sound nonpartisan? should private interest groups like this, backed by a billionaire or two, rather than the state legislators of Georgia, be allowed to pick and choose where to boost election funding and turnout in the Peach State? Okay, first, hoping to forestall criticisms like mine, I suspect, CTCL funded more counties won by Republican candidate Trump than by Democratic candidate Biden, 27 counties to 17. But that's misleading. A much better comparison, CTCL funded 21% of Trump counties versus 55% of Biden counties. So a Biden county was over 2.5 times more likely to receive funding. 9 out of 10 of CTCL's largest grants went to Biden counties. Or look at the 10 counties in Georgia that had the biggest shifts toward the Democratic candidate in their voting from 2016 to 2020. 9 of the 10 received CTCL grants. And those 9 grantees averaged a 13.7% shift toward the Democrat. 2 of the counties, Cobb and Gwinnett, were among the 4 counties that delivered Biden the most votes. Of those 4 counties that gave Biden 100,000 votes or more, CTCL funded all 4, Clayton, DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett. And it funded those counties lavishly. Per capita, those counties were funded between $4.38 and $10.47 for every man, woman, and child. By contrast, so far as we currently know, only 1 county, won by Trump, was funded over $1 per capita. That was Cherokee, but its Democratic vote leapt up 70% compared to a 24% rise in its Republican vote. Trump counties like Carroll, Camden, and Lumpkin got around $0.50 or less. Biden carried 33 counties that delivered him 10,000 votes or more. CTCL funded 70%. By contrast, Trump carried 46 counties by 10,000 votes or more. CTCL funded only 20%. So that means the most vote-rich counties for Biden were 3.5 times more likely to be funded than Trump's most vote-rich counties. In sum, if you total the votes in all the 44 counties that CTCL funded, the Republican presidential vote rose by 207,000 this election versus the last. The Democratic presidential vote jumped by 530,000, or more than 2.5 times the Republican rise. Of course, the CTCL is not the only factor in this year's elections in Georgia, but I insist it is not a small factor. I urge you to investigate every dealing it had with every county. Did the contacts begin from the center's side? What preconditions did the center put on its funding? Did the counties fulfill their budgetary and other obligations under Georgia state law when using these funds? Who designed voter education material and advertisements? Was any money spent on training that would help prevent vote fraud, such as how to match signatures? Above all, I urge you to consider whether you ever again want to permit privatized elections in Georgia, where wealthy donors steer resources so unequally and inequitably. Some states forbid such funding. You can too.
I have a question for you. Are you in essence saying that by doing this that campaign finance laws are being circumvented? Is that part of what you're saying?
My specialty is nonprofit law, and I can tell you that the federal nonprofit law for C3s like this is very murky. It's possible to do voter registration and get out the vote if you're a C3 legally, but it has to be strictly nonpartisan. If it's not strictly nonpartisan, then you are violating federal tax law. I think it's a shame that your colleagues in D.C.'s Congress haven't done a better job of spelling out that line. I can tell you that Republican and conservative groups, they do not do this with C3 money. C3 foundations don't fund, and C3 groups don't execute voter registration and get out the vote. They just don't, because they're scared they're going to break the law. The left is shameless, and because the line is murky, they're happy to leap over it. You are right, I'm not an election expert, but you're right, too, that the FEC might be persuadable that this was an in-kind contribution to one side or the other, but that's not for me to say.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Senator Jordan.
Number 7. Thank you for being here. It's my understanding that these were COVID relief grants. Is that correct?
Ma'am, that's what they called them.
But they are called COVID relief grants?
That's what they're called. I don't believe that the Democratic partisans who actually run the institution suddenly discovered a concern for COVID, and the fact that they are experts in voter turnout for one particular party entirely slipped their mind.
And specifically, the money was to help counties and local election officials to ensure safe and healthy elections because of the pandemic. Isn't that correct?
That's what they said, ma'am.
Okay, and with respect to that, the counties could seek those grants, get the grants, and then use them very specifically for PPE or any other initiatives that were intended to make it safer for voters to actually vote during a pandemic.
Well, you know, ma'am, that is a wonderful question, because I think you should be investigating those counties to see if that's what they did. I can show you some of the contracts that have been made public that were made with places like Philadelphia, for instance. PPE was not a very high priority in the contracts that they made with those government jurisdictions. What mattered was things like advertising and voter education materials and the rest. So I'm sorry, I don't believe they're very sincere.
Okay, so let me just close the circle here. Do you have any evidence whatsoever that anything untoward happened with those funds with respect to the counties that got the grants? In Georgia, not anywhere else, in this state.
There is very little evidence that the money went toward actual COVID concerns. And again, I urge you all to investigate that to see where the truth lies. The legality of all this is highly murky under both election law and tax law.
So the answer is no.
Ma'am, I think I use a very good 501c3 tax lawyer to make sure that we don't violate anything. When I sent him my testimony, his instant response was their tax exemption should be revoked. So that expert in law thinks that just what you heard today is absolute evidence of impropriety.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Thank you, sir, for being here today. We appreciate your testimony.
Thanks so much.